everybody, and welcome. It is Wednesday, and we are live with the view from the top. We have got the most amazing show for you today. We're going to be talking about the future. We're going to be talking about why is mobility, in many cases, stuck in the 20th century when we're living in the 21st. The name of the show is It Doesn't Have to Be Like This. And that's what we're going to be talking about, how we can all collectively coming together, change the way that we do things and maybe reinvent our future or create our future with a new global mobility world. So it's a fascinating discussion. And I'm delighted to say that we got Shelley Crofts from BAE Systems, who's a real visionary and thought leader in this area, joining us on the show today. We have, of course, also got Julie Onslow-Cole with her immigration update and Julie Barron with her tax update. So an amazing show we've got lined up, but you know how it works. And I can see many of you already doing that. Join in the conversation, write in the comments box. Let's see who's out there. We've got Steve Homsey from Denver. We've got Vivi Himmel from London. We've got people coming in from all over the world. And it's so great to see Helen Frew from the Permits Foundation from Leiden. People just coming in from all over the world, which is just fantastic. So the other great thing about this show is that not only do you get to invent the future, you get to discuss what's going on, you get all the gossip, you get to find out what's going on, but also you get your credits. So you may want some CPE credits. You may want them from Worldwide ERC, and many thanks to Lynn and the team at ERC. But if you want your GMS or your CRP credits, they're up there. If you want your HRCI credits, then they're up there. And if you want your SHRM credits, they're also up there. So if you want those credits, I'll leave that up there just for a moment or two, but just jot down the number, get your camera out and take a quick photo of it or take a screenshot, however you want to do it. Just make sure you grab those credit numbers there, and then you can get those credits, which will be great. Next week on the show, we're going to be doing an end-to-end overview of the Benevo award-winning mobility platform. We're going to be talking a lot on the show today about what the future looks like. And then next week, tying that in, we're actually going to be showing you a deep dive into some really, really cool technology. So lots of exciting things happening this week. And by the way, we've got some amazing shows lined up for you over the next few weeks that we're going to be telling you about as well. So what's been going on in our wonderful world? We always like to share a little bit of breaking news, and there has been quite a bit of breaking news. So I'm going to share that now. And the great news is, first of all, many congratulations to everybody who's moved jobs, but also for those of you who are looking, there's loads of job opportunities out there, and we're going to share some of those. So let's go and tell you a little bit about all the breaking news from this week. We have it, loads of really good news, lots of really good jobs out there, and many people being promoted, and indeed some people being relocated. So that's great. I'm seeing wonderful comments coming in. Anyway, without further ado, let's talk immigration. We always try and get, well, Deal has over 200 job opportunities. I just saw that come from Steve Hoffman. Wow, check that out. That's amazing. So let's have a look at some immigration news. What's been going on in the wonderful world of immigration? And as ever, I'm delighted to say that our special guest to talk about immigration is the great, the legend, Julia Onslow Cole.
Hi, Brian.
Julia, how are you doing?
Very well, thank you. Very well.
And whereabouts are you this week?
I'm in France. Yeah.
I always have to ask you, because every week it seems to be a different location. I was saying your passport must be filling up quicker than pretty much anybody else I know.
Yes, probably not something to be proud of, really, is it?
Anyway, Julia, what are we going to be talking about today?
So today I wanted just to talk to everyone about worldwide trends in immigration. And I wanted to give a big shout out to Scott Leib and his team in the Knowledge Centre at Fragaman, because he and his team produce this report, which is once a quarter. And he and his team took me through all the data that's going to be published very shortly in a few days' time for the first quarter. So expectations are mixed as to whether we're going to avoid a global recession. But without a doubt, as everyone knows, the world is really seeing a much sharper than expected economic slowdown, with inflation really high and as high as we've seen in several decades. And in the backdrop of those really difficult conditions, what we're also seeing is this year has an unprecedented number of government elections. So I actually did a trawl this morning of all the countries that were having a general election this year. And there was really quite a few, well over 25, Nigeria, Thailand, Turkey, Pakistan, Luxembourg. And then in Europe, for example, there's a lot of state provincial elections. And all our data and analytics are really saying that if you've got this quite complex negative background of the economy, then you have quite a high level of dissatisfaction with governments around the world. You then have the danger of protests and fringe parties gaining power, which has put quite a lot of unsettlement in the whole sort of policy arena. What we are seeing globally is rising unemployment. It's quite slow, but against that rising unemployment, there are also these acute labour shortages, and they're particularly shortages in specific tech skills. But then obviously we're also getting major layoffs. Now, when you turn to the Ukraine, obviously there's no end in sight for the war, which is obviously terrible, and the sanctions are continuing for Russia. But from an immigration perspective, there's two things to see. One is we're seeing an increased return of Ukrainian refugees coming back to Ukraine. So 2.3 million people have returned. And we're slightly worried that if the situation in Ukraine worsens, they won't be able to avail themselves of all the concessions that are out there for Ukrainian nationals if they have to leave again. And then what we are seeing is a ratcheting up of restrictions for Russian citizens. Now, on COVID, what we're seeing is a much more relaxed attitude for vaccinations. And even if there's another different pandemic, we think that we wouldn't have such severe lockdowns and such severe health and safety quarantine rules. But because of China, and we've dealt with that a couple of weeks ago, we are seeing a ramping up, just really affecting Chinese citizens. But the big news is that we don't see an end immediately to all of these huge delays at the consulates. And you remember these delays were caused because of COVID. On a much brighter note, business travel is almost back at pre-pandemic levels. And I think this is quite pertinent because in March 2020, we did a show where we had to guess when you'd get back to pre-pandemic levels. And Brian and I said September 2020. So we're only 3 years out, Brian. And then the other thing, Yeah. So then the other thing is that governments are being quite creative, and we've talked about this before. They're moving away from the sponsored route. We've seen this in Singapore with the One Pass. We've seen it in the UAE with golden visas and green visas, and we're seeing it in the UK. And there's also quite a lot of movement globally to help fuse tourist and business visas, which is a very positive thing. You know, the more people that can do a bit of business on a tourist visa, the better for business. And also pathways to help people for long-term talent retainment, you know, sort of long-term permanent resident pathways. The final point I want to just make is that digital transformation continues, and as internet connections get better all over the world, lots more governments are doing things online, but there's a huge sharing of intergovernment information, so you have to be very careful about compliance. And the very final point is that in the middle of COVID, there was such a proliferation of businesses looking at investment in digital health passports. And they thought that that would really take off and that everyone would have one of these digital health passports. But actually, they haven't taken off at all. And governments have their own systems for measuring digital health. And that's an area of investment that just never took off.
Okay, so Julia, amazing update there, and thank you for reminding us how bad we are at predicting. But it's nice that we've got there. We're at or about pre-pandemic levels now.
Yeah,
I know that very much from sector to sector, but yeah. that's great. So Julia, we're now going to move on from immigration to tax. So what I really want to do is get everybody to hit the heart button, hit the like button, hit the applause. Old-fashioned view from the top. Thank you to Julia Onslow-Cole, and a welcome to Julie Barron as we bring on our very own tax baron. Hey, Julie, how are you doing? How are you doing?
Very well. How are you, Brian?
It's always great to see you. And you're at home in DC, I take it.
I am. It's a nice sunny day here, so it's great.
Cool. Now, you might be at home in DC, but where in the world are you from a tax point of view this week?
So today, my first session I did the US, and then we moved over to Europe and talked about Spain. So I thought we'd go to the other side of the world today and talk a little bit about Australia.
Cool. Let's do it. Let's go down under.
Yeah, exactly. Just a couple of hot topics from Australia. I've been speaking with one of my colleagues, so I have to give a little shout out to Maria Ravisi down in Australia, who kind of talked me through all this, but decided not to join the show today, Brian, given that it's about 2 a.m. there or something like that.
Oh, no excuse. No excuse.
I know, pretty wimpy. Anyway, so yeah. So 2 hot topics in Australia right now. One is payroll, where the Australian government has implemented what they're calling STP2, which is single touch payroll, where it is a real-time feeding of payroll information into the Australian tax authorities. And the tricky part about STP2 is not the timing, it's the detail that's required. So you used to just feed gross income information into the payroll and all the reporting. Now you have to feed very, very detailed information. And there's 36 different labels of compensation that you have to categorize each piece of income that you might pay someone into one of these categories. And this actually went live at the beginning of 2022, but a lot of companies got amnesty and they were able to defer their compliance with these rules. But now's the time where everybody is struggling through this topic. So she said a lot of people are coming to her just saying, hey, help us make sure we have all of our different, not just domestic payroll categories coded properly, but other things too that have to be fed real time to the Australian government. So pretty tricky, right? Anyway, the other one is there was the ATO issued a draft about worker classification. So is someone your employee or are they a contractor? And in this,
that lots of countries are having around the world, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Because a lot of times it saves you money from a social tax perspective to have someone be a contractor. So it's in the company's favor to label someone a contractor instead of an employee. So the ATO have issued a draft that basically says, here are the scenarios and the different risk levels in different scenarios, but they didn't really give clear guidelines on here are the rules. So, here's a 10-part test of how you determine whether someone's an employee or a contractor. But they have said that this is going to be a hot topic for audits, and they're really going to be looking into when someone comes on, whether they're an employee or a contractor. So something to talk about and make sure that when you're hiring people, you're really categorizing them correctly. And because one of the items that they said would cause you to be in a lower risk category is if you got third-party confirmation on what the category is. But they're really looking at the contractual and the legal rights of both the employer and the employee. So something to look for in Australia, and make sure you've got your employees versus your contractors classified correctly.
Cool. Okay, Julie, thank you so much for that. And that whole question, as we talked about, employee versus contractor, I know is such a big issue for companies of all sorts, especially those actually with employees in the gig economy too. Such a big issue around the world. So, Julie, many, many thanks for all your help as ever. And we look forward to seeing you again in a couple of weeks for the next edition of the Tax Baron live on The View from the Top. I apologize for having done this to you. You are now officially
I know.
The Tax Baron to everybody out there at Vialto Partners and all your clients and contacts. That's it. You have
now I have a nickname. Yep.
You are Sir Julie. So anyway, we're now going to say goodbye to you, everybody. As we say goodbye to Julie, please hit the heart button, hit the like button, hit the applause button, and let's say goodbye just for 2 weeks until she comes back. Julie Barron from Vialto Partners. So what I'm now going to do is bring onto stage our very own producer, the brains behind this show, who makes it all come alive. And Tally, what are you going to tell us this week?
Okay, I want to be really quick because you have an amazing speaker just waiting in the green room. So just really quickly, I want to remind that on May 17, we're going to open our nomination. We're going to close our nominations. We're going to have our top 100 diversity champion. We're going to open that later in March. We'll have the exact date advertised soon. But right now, we're looking for ideas. If anyone has good forums for us to call up to people, this is a really, really important subject, and we want to get as many people into the loop and to really find our champions, our real champions in the area of diversity. The other thing, we have tomorrow our first mobility masterclass on tax and compliance. And if you haven't signed up yet, I will send the link to that. We're going to have Beth in FEM Amsterdam. And if you meet her, I will also send a link to that. And for our change makers, and I saw a few of them in the audience, we're going to have a meetup there. So if any one of you is interested and is going to be in Amsterdam, let us know. And last, before I leave, we are extending our supplier networks. So if anyone is interested, and only if you're a good supplier, do contact us. And again, I will send a link to that in the comments.
Great. Thank you so much, Tally. And yeah, the top 100 diversity champions, that's going to be our list for this year. So we're not live yet. This is a soft launch. We're just giving you a heads up, but start thinking about who it is. And it can be diversity through any lens that you like. It could be a black or people of color lens. It could be a gender lens. It could be an orientation lens. It could be a disability lens. Whatever lens, we want to have as broad a list as possible of the top 100 global mobility diversity champion. So give some thought to that, everybody, and we are going to be going formally live with that in just a few weeks. Now we're going to get on to our main subject of the day. We are super honored that we've got in our green room. I'm super excited to meet Shelley Crofts, who's the head of global mobility at BAE Systems. And we're going to be talking about, it doesn't have to be like this. So without further ado, everybody, hit the heart button, hit the like button, hit the applause button, and let's welcome the wonderful Shelley Crofts. Hey, Shelley, I'm so honored and excited that you're with us on the show. And no pressure, but we've got about 200 people watching us right now. And no doubt half
Thanks for that.
friends and family are out there too. So if you know Shelley's out, if you work with Shelley, if she's a friend or something, or you just want to say hi, put the comments, throw them on screen, put the comments out there in LinkedIn. But Shelley, I said I'm super excited because you are a real breath of fresh air in this industry. But tell us a bit about yourself. How did you get into mobility? What's your career journey?
Yeah, so thank you so much for having me, and a massive thank you for that introduction. I was amazed that it's not just my mum listening on the line. So yeah, no, very, very grateful to be here.
You've got 200 mums out there.
She doesn't know how to use LinkedIn either, so I think we're safe. Yeah, so my background is as an employment lawyer. So I spent 15 years as an employment lawyer, the last 4 of which I was part of the labour law team within BAE Systems. So during my career, I kind of got more and more into international. So certainly working within BAE, we have kind of circa 90,000 employees globally. We have a lot of very different territories that we work in, some very complex, some very difficult territories to work in. And within my labour law days, I became something of an expert in Omani labour law and labour laws of kind of international nature.
Okay, so that's a pretty unusual way into mobility, isn't it? Because most people get into mobility through, either they've worked in a reload company or they've gone in through immigration or tax. I don't think there's that many people in the industry I can think who've actually come in as labour lawyers. But obviously, labour law is such an important aspect of any sort of assignment agreement, and indeed, especially when things go wrong with an assignment, I expect labour lawyers get very heavily involved.
Absolutely. So I spent about 7 years supporting the global mobility function within BAE Systems, but from my role as a labour lawyer. So I knew the team well. I certainly knew the front kind of setup side of things in terms of the documentation, the contracts, some of the obtaining sort of immigration advice, etc. And as you described, then when maybe things don't go perfectly, there's often a time where I would be supporting the function, what do we do? How do we manage the risk in these situations? So I felt I had a fairly decent view of certainly the more kind of compliance aspects of mobility. And an opportunity came up for me to go and sit alongside the team actually for about 9 months, solely looking at strategy. So it was a really, really fascinating role and a massive opportunity for me to take those 9 months and look in the market and look at how we were structuring things within BAE Systems. And really
step back before we get into that. I want to go for people who don't know BAE Systems. Just tell us what the company does.
Okay, so we're a very large defence company. So we, big picture, have a number of key sectors within us. So we have our air sector, who build kind of aircraft planes, which we support other territories as well in developing kind of those aircraft. We have a maritime and land sector, so very big picture. We're talking about nuclear submarines, we're talking about warfare ships, we're potentially talking about weaponry. And then we have our digital intelligence business, which is largely cybersecurity, a real kind of growth area, as you guys will absolutely imagine, and also now moving in towards space and defence. So,
okay, so if we're talking about your workforce, then you've presumably got a lot of very intelligent people there who are developing all sorts of stuff that probably you and I couldn't even start thinking about, and so almost literally rocket scientists. I mean, so the people who are moving are going to be very, very switched on, bright, tech savvy. Not necessarily all of them, but a lot of them are going to be like that.
100%. And that's one of the things I've said to my team on coming into the role is the people that we are working with and the role that we do and the products that we create as an organisation. The complexity within the nuclear submarines that we create, design, create and build is actually more complex than sending a rocket to the moon. It is an absolute cutting edge. And one of the things I'm super conscious of from a global mobility perspective is that we don't sit there and say that, it's too difficult or it's too complex, because we can't sit there with any integrity to the colleagues that we have and the work that they're doing, the amazing work that they are doing, kind of helping those who protect us out in the defence world. We can't stand there and say, this is just a bit difficult. It's very hard. It's very complicated. It is. There's a lot going on in the global mobility landscape, but it's not too hard.
Yeah, it's difficult, but do it anyway. It's the sort of, dream the impossible dreams of thing that, we're going to sort of somehow do it. So you came into BAE Systems in a transformation role, and tell us about that. I mean, were you shocked when you went in, or did you sort of, tell us a bit about, your views when you sort of walked into the industry?
Yeah, so as I say, I'd kind of got a little understanding as to what the team did and some of the challenges of the team, and certainly I was kind of on the receiving end of some of those frustrations from assignees. So I did have a fair view as to, absolutely that level of complexity. But as I say, I was gifted that opportunity to sit alongside the team for 9 months and understand, we really, really wanted to improve and drive forward our employee experience. So our assignee experience, the family experience. And what I really, really wanted to get to the crux of is, how can we make this better? What is the thing that we haven't quite got right? Why isn't this gelling? I did an awful lot of looking out into the industry, an awful lot of working with providers, with other suppliers, testing, sharing with competitors and other people with companies of our size, smaller companies. How have we got this wrong? And as I was going through that kind of 9-month period, I have to say I was almost waiting for this moment of epiphany of, this is where we need to resolve this aspect, and we will see a massive improvement in terms of that employee experience. And a lot of the testing that I did, a lot of the benchmarking I did, didn't really have us out of kilter. So there were a lot of other big companies that were in very similar situations. And it started to dawn on me probably about 6 months into role, as I was waiting for this moment of clarity. And it started to hit me that there wasn't just one element that we hadn't quite got right. Actually, we needed to look at everything. We needed to look at every single one of our processes and why they were so complicated and why they were so difficult and maybe convoluted, and what sat behind the processes with our suppliers that made it so difficult for our suppliers to help us. We had convoluted methodologies, we had things that had grown up over decades of time, and actually we'd never gone back to them and kind of lifted the rock and kind of tested it and said, does it need to be like this? Does it need to be this difficult or this hard?
I think there are so many things in, and this is not a criticism, but in everybody's programs that somehow are just there because they've always been there. I know we were chatting earlier, and I told you the story that I'd heard of the procession in a church where the people were processing around, and at a certain point in the procession, everybody ducked, one by one as they got there, and they ducked and they stood up. It was like a little sort of bow thing. And one day somebody asked them, why do you always do that? And the answer was, well, it's just our tradition. We've always done it like that. And And that was that. And they carried on doing it. And then somebody said, well, let's find out why. And they researched it, and they met the oldest member of the congregation. He said, oh, yeah, no, there used to be a beam at that point in the building, and we had to duck to get under it. And so the tradition had carried on even when the need for it had gone.
It is, and that's perfect. Yeah. It's a perfect analogy, because my team will laugh at this when they're on. I know they'll be on. The number of times within that 9-month period, I'd sit alongside and understand, what they were doing, and just ask the question why. But don't stop at one why, but why. And then there's another why, but why do we do that? And actually, when you start to dig beneath it, so many times it doesn't need to be like that anymore. It was a legacy reason why it had been like that. And what we've ended up doing is having to put plasters over things, or kind of squash them to fit in a particular scenario. And the technology that is out there, it's really difficult for us to take advantage of the full scope of what that can achieve for us, because there's so much of behind the scenes that is almost unnecessarily complicated, because you just haven't had that fresh pair of eyes. So I certainly think I
can see you as the Delilah of global mobility.
I'm not sure my team would agree. But it is. It's a fresh pair of eyes. It's we've done it like that because, well, do we need to do it like that today? And maybe we do. Maybe today we need to do it like that. But do we need to do it like that in 5 years? And actually, if we don't need to do it in 5 years, how can we work back from that to start simplifying? Even if it's one little step in the right direction, that is a step ahead from where we were yesterday.
I think moving things forward is so important. I want to give a shout out to Vivi Himmel from Alta Vita, who I know is in the audience. She very kindly gave me a book the other day that she thought I might be interested in, called The Hard Thing About Hard Things, by a guy called Ben Horowitz, who's one of the founders of Andreessen Horowitz, which is one of the biggest investors in startup companies in the world. They're legendary out in Silicon Valley. But one of the points he makes in the book, apart from the fact that hard things are hard, is he says, time is not your friend. And I think that's such a powerful thought, that, that if you're going to make change, it's too easy to just delay it. But actually, time is not your friend. Technology may be your friend, and we'll come on to that. But time is actually your enemy, and you need to find a way of pushing things forward to make those first steps.
Totally agree. And again, that's another observation since I've been in the team. We've got a fantastic team of kind of about 30 people, around 30 people, just trying to kind of continue with the business as usual. There are new programs, there are new contracts being signed, we're needing to move into new territories, there are repat processes, there are kind of transformations within the programs themselves, things that we want to help and support the business areas to achieve. But on top of that, we almost need to do more. And I kept describing this to the team, we're sort of at the top of the hill in terms of some of these improvements. And if we can just reach over the top of that hill, we'll start to benefit from some of the automation that we know is out there, some of the opportunities that are out there. And actually, one of the things that I'm kind of building within my team is a separate transformation side of the team. So all the business as usual and all of the program support that we can have, but actually you need more resource to start helping to unpick a lot of these legacy issues, particularly in areas whereby these programs have been running for a number of years. It's going to take time, and you're absolutely right. Another observation of mine coming into the team in the function was quite often with broader scale transformation programs across BAE Systems, maybe across the kind of HR function, which is where we sit, or within shared services, have quite often kind of put global mobility to the side at some point because it is so complex. And that's just self-perpetuating. The very first thing I said on joining in that strategic role was, do not pull us out of anything. We're hard, we're complicated, we're difficult, we've got a lot of SMEs, we've got a lot of stakeholders. But if we continually get kind of put to the side because it's a bit difficult or it's complex, we are never going to actually achieve the transformation that we need to, that we want to kind of deliver that strategic advisory service for the business.
I think one of the problems people have in many global mobility functions is they're so busy being busy.
Yeah.
They don't actually have the time to find ways of simplifying it. And the analogy that that I use is, imagine that you're sort of juggling balls in the air and you've got all these balls and it's hard to juggle all the balls. The answer, of course, is to put some of the balls down and concentrate on it. And the problem that we all have is, look at that comment there, great GM team with a gladiator at the helm. Oh, there you are. Carmen's giving you a gladiator, Shelley. But, you know, I thought one of the problems is that we confuse sometimes what's urgent with what's important. And we focus on all the urgent stuff. It might be the latest case that is blowing up, and understand why we do that. But actually, we do all that urgent stuff, but we're not actually doing the important stuff. But anyway, so let's concentrate now on the important stuff. What are your big frustrations when you look at mobility as it is, not necessarily at BAE, but you know, mobility generally, it functions? What are the things that really get your goat that you think we should be simplifying?
Yeah, where to start?
Go on, let's the wish list for change.
I have to say, for me, it's the integration. So almost the kind of collaboration between different SMEs that you absolutely need in order to make a successful move. But it's how those SMEs and how the technology is integrated, I find a huge frustration. Because if you put the lens of everything we are doing is for that user experience, the employee experience and the business experience, and what can we push ahead with to drive and deliver improvements in that. So from an individual perspective, if you have 7 different portals that you've got to go into, so the tech has advanced, you know, in each of these different elements, you have technology that is there to support. But my biggest frustration is that technology only takes us probably about 30 or 40% of the way, because that overall experience for the individual is still fragmented, and it's still having to input your data for one purpose over here, then enter another portal, input it for something else. In an ideal world, in utopia, when we get there, it's going to be amazing, but it will be integrated technology with one window at the top where the users go through, they have a consistent experience. It doesn't matter which of the international opportunities across BAE Systems you're going for, you have a consistent approach. We have to do an awful lot on our side of the fence to support getting rid of that kind of complexity and the fragmentation that we have to help our suppliers help us. So it's that collaboration as an industry, and that's one thing I have really noticed on coming into this world is how much of a team it is. You know, it doesn't matter who you work for, everybody is out there to help and support each other. Everybody is willing to spend time to share lessons learned, or, you know, we tried this and it didn't work, or have you thought about. There's a real culture of collaboration, but we need to kind of pin that down into tangible collaborative technology to help that experience in terms of how does it feel, you know, how does it feel for the individual user and their family.
This is from Brent. He says, Shelley is a breath of fresh air in an industry that is often resistant to change. And he's got the all power to you there sign. But I mean, it is like that. And I mean, obviously, you know, from my point of view, looking at it with a Beneva hat on, a lot of that technology is out there. And you talk about, you know, putting the same data in twice, which certainly, and we'll be showing that next week, you know, on our platform. You don't have to. But it is crazy that, and I know I've said this 1,000 times on this program, is that if I order a pizza or something, it'll remember stuff about me. It'll remember my credit card. It'll remember this or that. You know, it remembers lots of stuff. It remembers my address. Whereas, you know, what we're having in a mobility quite often is you have to enter the same data. Or actually, I say you, quite often, of course, it's the employee who's having the experience, the assignee, who's having to enter that same data, you know, maybe their social security number or their passport number or their marital status or whatever the information is being entered countless times. And it shouldn't be like that. And we call it automagic functionality. And the system should always be the case that if you've entered it once, you've entered it everywhere. You shouldn't have to enter the same data more than once. And that's something that, you know, with a Beneva hat on, I know that we're absolutely passionate about. I mean, Laura says, super insightful Shelley Crofts out there. Your fan club is out in force today. I'm not surprised, because you really are a breath of fresh air. And I think, you know, another thing you were talking about is the fact it's such a collaborative industry. And, you know, and I mean, people talk about vendors, and I know I use that word too. It's a horrid word, but, you know, it's partners. You know, the vendors are your partners. We are all in it together for the common good of actually making the employees' experience as good as possible. So tell us about some of your other things that, you know, get your goat. So we talked about, you know, data input. I think I'm trying to think. You were talking about accommodation booking at one point when we were chatting earlier. That was an area where you said that can be problematic.
Yeah, it is. It's a challenge. And as I say, you know, this isn't. Some of the frustrations I have are absolutely not reflections on suppliers or individual kind of ability to provide service to us. And equally, you know, like you described with Benevo, some of the technology is out there. But when I sat in that strategy role, I did test with a number of other kind of big companies and big providers, and lots of people just aren't utilizing the tech that's out there. Or, you know, I have invested in something a few years ago and are still trying to make it work, but we've invested in it now for 4 or 5 years. So maybe, you know, we don't want to throw what we've done away. Maybe we'll continue to. So, you know, the world is moving on. We're absolutely on a journey. There are elements that I described that probably are out there in the marketplace, but holistically, my experience is that companies aren't benefiting from, you know, some of these advancements. So again, let's just take that kind of booking of temporary accommodation. I think how I described it to you guys previously was when you historically used to book a holiday, you'd go to the travel agent. I have very fond memories of rocking up with my mum, picking every single brochure under the sun, especially the expensive ones, and they disappeared quite quickly, I tell you that. But, you know, trawling your way through the brochures, looking, circling them, turning the pages over, going back out, trotting to the agency and booking your holiday. Very, very rare does that happen these days. It's all online. You do your own review. You have your filters. You can search it. You can filter depending on exactly what you want. Do you want a beach location? Do you want, you know, disabled access? What is it that you're looking for? And that functionality is absolutely out there in the industry. And that's what Alta Vita are kind of starting to do in terms of, you know, almost bringing it forward to what we expect in other everyday aspects of our lives. It feels like the mobility industry is a bit more laborious, and it's a little bit more, you know, we still have to almost trot off to our experts to get information about what temporary accommodation we might use, and then we trot back to the individual. You give it to the individual to let them have an understanding of what's out there. Those are the sort of examples where you wouldn't dream of going to a travel agent now to book your holiday unless maybe it was a super fancy one. It's there in your fingertips. And if I think about that user experience, that's what they expect too. So when it comes as that's not what they're receiving, it might be market standard, it might not be that far away from what everyone else is doing, but the user experience, as you described, Brian, they're used to getting their pizza. They can track their pizza with better certainty than they can track their worldly belongings here, there and everywhere. Yeah, I've just seen the comment there from Mena, but it's almost a resistance.
Mena's comments back on screen. It's the resistance to change. It's the resistance of not wanting to change.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly, you know, people don't change, but, you know, as some wag once said, you know, change is inevitable. ... apart from a vending machine. You know. But that aside, you know, change is happening, you know, and I mean, the latest thing, of course, in the last few weeks is we've seen ChatGPT come out and all that artificial intelligence, and that's going to be the next thing. And basically, you know, there's going to be two sorts of people going forward. There's going to be those people who embrace the latest technology and those people looking for work, because the technology is going to come through, and it's coming through at such a fast pace. I suppose, to me, one of the issues that is worth thinking about is, in your everyday role, how do you know something needs to change? And I would set out a couple of tests, and I'd ask you, Shelley, maybe to come up with something of your own. But I'd say this: if you're doing something where you're entering the same piece of data more than once, then you're doing something wrong. If you're doing something where you're cutting and pasting from one spreadsheet to another, you're doing something wrong. what are the other? I mean, there must be other tests like that. You know, if you're doing, I'm trying to think of others, but those sorts of things. I mean, Shelley, if you,
I'd add to that. So if you're hearing noise from assignees in a particular area, we've got something wrong. And you know, we've absolutely looked into that through last year. It was the assignee feedback that we were getting that sparked us to really hone in on some of our process steps to say, you know, we must have something wrong here, because we wouldn't be getting this level of noise if we didn't. And again, you know, last week at a team meeting, I challenged the team and said, do you guys, when you're running these processes, when you're going through doing the tracking and, you know, using some of these Excel spreadsheets to check against what we've got in the system, does that feel like a good process for you guys? Does that feel like a slick process? And it was a little bit of silence. Everyone was a bit nervous at what to say. I said, no, does it feel really painful when you're doing it? Because you guys are using them, flag it. You know, we can look at them. We can do a deep dive. We can unpick it. We can ask the question why 5 times to get to the root cause of why are we doing it like this? Why is this so painful? And then rebuild it.
Yeah. Actually, I'll throw in some more here. I mean, if you are waiting a period of time to get a response and it's not instant, that's an issue. And I'll give you a couple of examples of that. Take cost estimates. If you're doing a cost estimate and it takes 2 days to do, then you're doing something wrong because it should be instant. If you are, if you want to find out service level and you have to email your service provider and then you get a response back, you know, a few days later telling you how they are performing, you're doing something wrong. Because again, to use a sort of, you know, I don't know, a TripAdvisor, a Booking.com, and you know, something like that, you should be able to see reviews instantly, which is what you can do in the consumer sector. So set yourself the questions, ask yourself the challenges. And if it's not instant, if it's not, well, another one I'd add is predictive. You know, do you know what's going to happen? Do you know if you've got an assignee who's en route to going somewhere, do you know whether they're likely to be starting on time? So all these sorts of things. Or another one, I suppose, is if your boss asks you a question like, how many assignees do I have and where are they today? And what's the diversity spread? Or, you know, whatever it is, if you don't have that information without looking for it, then something's gone wrong, because you should be able to get it. The question in all this is, how can you get this?
And that's the key to me is it takes everybody. That's what I mean about kind of being collective. So there's no good me sitting there and asking these questions, and I do, and I will, and I'll carry on. But I need every single one of my team to be asking those questions in having that mindset. And I need every single one of my suppliers to be asking the same questions of themselves and of us in a collaborative way. You know, is there a better way that we can do this? We're always finding this invoicing process really painful. Let's just have a quick call. Let's get it out on the table. You know, what works for you? What works for us? Is there a simpler way of doing this? All these minor efficiencies, and that goes back to my point around waiting for this moment of epiphany on how we were doing it wrong. It's analysing every single little thing we do, alongside maybe some kind of bigger tech jumps and tech investments, but every single item and everybody doing it with the lens in their mind, you know, how can we continuously improve this? How can we work better with our payroll function? How can we better align with our pensions team to understand contribution levels? I think, again, there was another example I gave in terms of UK immigration. So if we are sponsoring someone to come and work in the UK, we have obligations under our sponsor license. And one of the sort of challenges we have as such a large organisation is when people move or when their line managers move, how do we satisfy ourselves that they've absolutely, you know, they know what their obligations are? So we can't just change a job title, or we can't just change a location. It's super important that we have control over it. So to some extent, we have a report that comes out of our HR information system. So that will run us a report. If there is a change in line manager, we will be notified. That's great. You know, that's a massive step in terms of making sure we know what's happening and what's going on. But why can't we take it a step further so that actually, if that line manager changes, instead of us getting a notification, trotting back to the line manager saying, you have someone who's being sponsored, here are your obligations, why couldn't it automatically through the HRIS system push through some training on our Spark platform so that it drops into that new line manager's account and you have some online training that says, here are your obligations, this is what you need to do? we don't need to be involved in that process at all. You know, it's every line item like that that will simplify and kind of free us up. And again, I've described this before in my experience of coming into the industry where the technology is there, but it's not doing everything we need it to. When you're looking at that, an awful lot of our team members are kind of plugging gaps on things so that the user experience is good, but behind the scenes, we're running around trying to make things happen, make it look seamless. So by plugging all those gaps.
I want to pull up a comment here, because quite an interesting comment from Helen Harfield. Helen, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, is head of global mobility at Unipart Group. And she says, it's harder for small programs, though. These things are easier on the economy of scale model. And I think,
agree.
Yeah,
I'd say it's both sides. So there are some benefits on having a smaller program because you can wrap your arms around it. And yes, there are some benefits on the economy of scale of a larger program. In my experience, the larger the program, certainly if they are not unified, it becomes increasingly difficult to utilize the technology to support. But yeah, absolutely take your point that there are different challenges for different size mobility teams in terms of the mobility that they're trying to manage. And equally, the other thing I'd say is there's different challenges depending on some of the locations that you might be going to. So that's where it gets difficult. That's where there is no one size fits all solution to mobility.
And as Jeremy Chanda has said, I'll just pull that one up too. There are some great solutions available even for the smaller programs, and there are. But I mean, another point I think I would make actually is that small programs are actually a lot larger sometimes than you think they are. Because certainly one of the things we find with Benevo is that, you know, a company may actually have only, say, 50 assignees. But actually, you look at a number of people who are starting work and who are moving to start work. They might be interns, they might be permanent transfers, they might be domestic. Actually, the numbers mount up quite quickly. You know, the number of the people who relocate to work is often many, many times the number of people who are being moved through the global mobility function. And one of my pet issues is quite often the global mobility function doesn't liaise with the talent acquisition function. And actually there's thousands of people quite often that are not going through mobility in large organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd echo what you said in the size of your program. It's a really interesting piece. So for us, we have some programs that are tried and tested. They've been there for decades, and there's a process set up to enable that. Other parts of our organisation have far smaller footprints in a larger number of locations, and it's, you know, going into an entity or into a country in an entity for the first time is a huge amount of work. So although it's only one individual, that could be more work for our team than a program that has movement of, you know, 10, 15 people a month because it's tried and tested. That's where it gets really difficult in trying to have a solution that will solve everything across the GM function, because you have jurisdictional challenges that are going to be unique, you have program differences that are going to be unique, and you have technology that, you know, certainly from an organisation of our scale, we don't have one platform across all of our different corporate structures globally. We're on a journey to get there, but until the organisation has got there, we're having to manage with lots of different systems, and it does mean that there have to be workarounds, or there have to be plasters put over things until we can get to that endpoint and that vision, which is simplification and standardisation.
Yeah, and you are, almost a uniquely difficult organisation because security is so much at the heart of everything you do, for obvious reasons. You know, I can imagine that getting stuff done when there's any line of, before
incredibly difficult.
Yeah,
incredibly, especially the kind of the IT security lens as well, adds yet more challenges, but they're not insurmountable. That's what I've kind of come to learn is everything. We can find a solution. We just have to invest the time and unpick it sufficiently to understand how do we rebuild this better.
Yeah, I mean, this is the breath of fresh air that I was talking about. The nothing is impossible belief that actually, we can do it. It may not be perfect, but but let's not make great the enemy of the good. Let's just get there bit by bit and move in the right direction. I'm going to ask you one question. In fact, I'm going to ask the audience the question. We only got a few minutes left. I'm going to ask the audience this question, which is, if you had a magic wand, what aspect of your global mobility function would you change first? And these are the choices we gave: the structure of your GM team, the policies and programs, the technology, or the vendors. So I'll put you on the spot, Shelley, but also I'll ask the audience, and then I'll tell you actually, because we did a poll on this, what the poll said, but what is the biggest priority in terms of changing stuff?
So I would probably say the technology, but it's a really difficult one, because actually you have to get every single one of those pillars right in order to achieve a successful program. I'll say the technology, because I think there are some relatively quick wins in terms of what's out there and how we can capitalize on some of the advancements over the last few years. But you can't really utilize the technology without having simplified our policies and programs that sit underneath it. You hit a blocker as soon as you try to implement something from a tech perspective. So it's a trick question on my part, because I'm going to say all of them.
Not allowed. But when we went to the LinkedIn poll, this is what LinkedIn said to us. 13% said it was the structure of their team they would change first. Policies and programs, 15%. A whopping great 69% said their tech first, and only 3% said it was the vendors. So if you're a vendor out there, then don't feel that this is something that that they're focusing on you. In fact, that's not the issue out there at all. It was only 3%. It was the tech that was the first thing that people are looking at if they could change, which I find absolutely fascinating. And just on the subject of tech, as I said, we are doing an end-to-end demo next week, but that's exciting. But even more exciting, if I say, we're going to be doing a show. I can't remember when, but it's in a few weeks' time. We're going to be doing a show specifically aimed on artificial intelligence and on ChatGPT. And we've got some amazing stuff that we're going to be showing and demoing in a few weeks' time. And we're going to announce that later. That's an exciting show we've got coming up. Meanwhile, we're getting towards the end of the hour. I want to bring in our specialists. I want to bring in Julie Onslow, Cole, and Julie, and we'll bring Tally back as well at the end of the show. So Julie and Julia, you've heard this. I mean, to me, there's a breath of fresh air out there. I'd just be interested in your take on this vision for the future.
I thought what Shelley had to say was so sensible and so fascinating. And I have to say, Shelley, I had to write down some of your quotes because I think they're so good. I mean, what you're saying about it's not good just to have the tech unless you look at your underlying policies. I mean that sounds obvious, but it isn't obvious, and lots of people think that the tech's the solution, but the policies have to be sorted out, and I thought it was very insightful what you said, so thank you. I'm sure people found it very helpful.
Yeah, lots of agreement with the tech in the audience, so everyone there with you.
Yeah, I think that's it though, that the tech isn't going to solve everything. The tech, I almost think, sometimes is held up as this is the magic wand that is absolutely going to solve all your problems. It won't. It can certainly help, and it's in the right direction, but there's a lot more we need to do behind the scenes to help the technology than help us.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And my challenge to the audience would be, try to work out where the problems are. And if you can't find any problems, then maybe look in the mirror, because there are problems. Yeah, exactly. Ask again. I called you Delilah. I mean, we should all be singing why? And challenge everything. Anyway, we are sadly out of time, so all that really remains is for me to thank the wonderful Shelley Crofts. As I said, you've been absolutely breathtaking to our industry.
Thank you.
Thank you to Julia and Julie for your expert insights, and as ever, thank you, Tally, for putting the show together. I'm Brian Friedman. This has been The View from the Top, and we are back again same time next week. Take care, everybody. Ta-ra.